about a birthday party?
Yeah, my son turned 7 on July 1st.
The boot, what happened?
It's been very odd. Yeah, I have a lot of other friends, especially being out and about in June, who also got
Oh my god.
I think it's just for COVID, so it's not that.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my
Neither one
god.
of them. I love her. And when they were
When
little,
was that?
like,
Affected and
4,
not
5,
really
they,
exposed to drugs for a while.
neither one of them are excited about birthday. They want to like go to like
Oh my god.
yeah, the whole class. Yeah, the whole. I wanted none of my class. They would never let me do a whole class because I always thought, okay, I want to show everyone, you know, the stuff.
In a good way or a bad?
So
Oh.
my daughter is sometimes.
Yeah, they said
Yes,
there were
one
women in the
was-
audience,
And she
but they're
I
streaming
tried.
and recording.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
My wife.
So how
Oh,
much?
there she is.
So you
And I mean, she. And
I was like,
she-
where?
They just went to Disneyland together. Her family took her to Disneyland. My kids are having because
Yeah. Oh man.
I'm feeling
I
so
tell you.
guilty about being so busy. My
I'm sorry to
like,
hear
Reese
that.
is my sister.
You're
They're
trooper.
in Alaska right now. My mom. They just get stuff.
Yeah, I can't. I really can't imagine.
Oh yeah, they're both vaccinated. Yeah. They're 12 and 14.
Years ago,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
obviously very
that's
different.
hard.
My dad got invited
Who
to
can be
do
out?
like a charity volleyball thing. And he was like, I
That's-
don't know do that. And we all gave him a hard time. For the kids. First shot, his patella ripped. Then he finally gets it back. He steps on the Husky team bus, slips, tears it off. And it was like, okay,
They
well,
just make it
I think I've been blamed for that the rest of my life.
a family. That's amazing.
Hour and a half.
Yeah.
Are we going in
They're,
different
they're
roads?
they're gonna round robin us.
Oh,
So like, they'll
Well, I was
popcorn
confused
and they'll all of us will get to answer the question.
Because
And each of us will get
I wasn't sure who's going to
in 45 seconds. And no opening, just closing.
Okay.
Welcome everybody to the West Seattle Memorial audience meeting today. So the hundreds of people that are watching all of our candidates today. We all being here on a Saturday and a beautiful Saturday at that. So thank you so much for your time today. We're really looking forward to listening to your comments and your thoughts about things that are really challenging everywhere in the country. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, to the West Seattle Block.
All right, so we'll be given 45 seconds each to answer a question. When I hold up the yellow card, that means you have reached 30 seconds. When I hold up the red card, it means you have 10 seconds. I will call time 45. If it appears that you're getting the same activities going on, you will set the mic. Also, for the audience, at the end, you should have, if you do not get exactly what I'm saying, we're going to do a group shot right off the table. Then if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so at that time. Tracy Record, who is currently moderator.
Thank you guys so much for showing up. Personally, and I see some of the gathering.
What would you do as Seattle mayor to support the Duwamish tribe in their quest for federal recognition? Mr. Donaldson.
Okay, thank you very much for the question, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. As Seattle mayor, I would really be an advocate for working with our indigenous people, the Duwamish tribe here in West Seattle, to further their efforts to be recognized and to obtain additional federal lands. These are issues that are historical in nature, cultural in nature, and regional in nature. We have to all come together and continue to push that rock uphill. We can do it as we work as a community that is in support and in favor of making sure the recognition is due. I thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you so much for the question, and thank you all for being here today. It is truly wonderful to be in person. You know, the city of Seattle has a very complicated relationship with tribal governments. That is true. And as a mayor, I have a responsibility to what is already established, which is a government-to-government relationship with both Muckleshoot and Suquamish tribes. And so it's very important to recognize that this is a tribal issue, that this is between tribal nations, and that is what I would respect and honor. Having said that, I have, over the years, had wonderful relationships with the Duwamish tribe. In my role as the executive director, I have supported their efforts. I have lifted up their community. I've done all I could to support who they are as tribal people. So thank you so much for the question.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jessyn Farrell, and it is so nice to be here with all of you and to be with our fellow candidates. This is really momentous to get to be together. So this is a really important issue. And again, I think that the real principle that would animate my engagement with the Duwamish tribe is that this is fundamentally about tribal to government relations, and that this is a tribal issue fundamentally, and that the mayor of Seattle needs to be supportive and to be in a listening mode around that, and to be affirming our tribe, our government to government relations with the existing tribes in the city. And that also means, though, fundamentally supporting every single person who lives in our city and making sure that culturally appropriate access to services are available.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and for having us in this wonderful space. My name is Lorena González. I'm a West Seattle resident and proud to be a candidate for mayor of Seattle. I have had an opportunity to sit down with the tribal leadership of the Duwamish tribe. And what I'm hearing them say to us is that they do want the help of the city of Seattle as it relates to being appropriately recognized by the federal government. Again, it is important to listen. And I think what I'm hearing loudly from them is they want the support of the next mayor of the city through the use of the bully pulpit, through the use of our federal connections with partners at the federal government to once and for all recognize them and their sovereignty. And I'd be ready to work with them on that effort.
Thank you. Thank you. In typical Zoom fashion, I have a nice shirt on, but I am doing this in my shorts. And so I'm trying to stay in the habit of how we've done it before. In all seriousness, I've read a lot about the issues that the Duwamish tribe has gone through and what their quest and what their fight has been. And it seems complicated and to some extent. And so what I would do as mayor is do exactly what I heard many of my esteemed colleagues on my right say: work with the leadership, know the city's role in this, which will be to lend resources to it, to talk to all the tribal communities to make sure that not only are we looking at the Duwamish's issues, but the entire indigenous population, because we all can learn from their struggle. So you'll see a strong partnership, collaborative partnership, not presuming I know the answer, but the answer will be found in the process by which we partner with them.
There we go. Good afternoon. So for me, what I really lean on is my understanding as a Black individual in the United States and the shared history that we have between ourselves and the indigenous tribes, how my ancestors were essentially stolen from our land in order to develop and colonize this land. And so it is imperative that whoever leads this city, and ideally it would be myself, that we actually advocate for those to be able to self-determine their future, and that includes their recognition. That being said, I do recognize the importance of not just lifting up the Duwamish, but all other tribes in the area. And so I am more than ready to have that discussion and that engagement. And while we continue that engagement and that discussion, to also be really good stewards of the land that is currently underneath our control as the city of Seattle.
Well, as mayor, I think this the most important thing we have to do is continue our partnership through the Duwamish Valley Action Plan, making sure we're addressing all the issues and challenges that the Duwamish community is facing, which is very important, and continue to work with our federal officials to make sure we get the data to them of the things that are happening to the communities, and make sure we come up with ideas to address them, in addition to making sure that we do what we can to make sure they're recognized appropriately.
Testing. Good. I'm Don Rivers, candidate for mayor. I'm Choctaw. Choctaw Nation organized the whole government structure of Native tribes. That's part of my heritage. The hate crimes that are done to women and children are very important in the tribal nations. The whaling situations, I feel personally that they should not be publicized. It is a tradition, and that really is tribal. Also, the fact that we entered the North Gate, we will also leave out of the North Gate. That's a Native term. I will work with them.
OCO, good afternoon. My name is Casey Sixkiller. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and I'm delighted to be here in West Seattle today. I'm also a direct descendant of the survivors of the Trail of Tears, and a long policy of Indian boarding schools and relocation that have impacted my family throughout my generations, including my father. So I know about this issue very much, about the challenges that Indian country feels and about being respected and treated as a partner. And I want to really sort of lift my hands up to folks here in West Seattle who have always viewed the Duwamish as partners and members of the original members of your community. And I think going forward, that's what we have to do. There is a political connection between the government to government relationship between the tribes, but we need to move past that and just focus on being partners and making sure the Duwamish are at the table as we design programs to support them.
Thank you all. Okay, so Ms. Echohawk, you'll be the first to answer this question. This is about police. In the Seattle Police Department's ongoing situation with attrition, the Southwest Precinct has lost a full third of its staff. What will you do as mayor to get the precinct back up to full staffing?
Well, thank you so much. And this is an issue that has been plaguing our city for the past many years now, since the consent decree. I have been honored to walk alongside people who are experiencing homelessness, who experience very negative impact of Seattle Police Department. And I think that as mayor of this city and thinking about what's going on here in West Seattle, I am committed to investing in community, to finding ways to support public safety out here in West Seattle. And as far as what needs to happen is with as many officers that need to be out here in West Seattle, I would be looking to do an audit, to be working with you all out here in West Seattle and make sure that we have the right kind of staffing.
Thank you. We're out of practice with microphones here. I think this is on. If not, I have a booming voice. So either way is fine. So thank you for this question. I think one of the problems with the conversation around public safety in this community, in our community, both in West Seattle and across the city, is that we are leading it with staffing levels, whether you want more or less, rather than starting with what our values are as a community. And I believe that every single person in our community should feel safe as they go about their day-to-day business. And for too many of our Black and brown friends and family members and neighbors, that is not the case. And so we need to be funding those strategies that create more safety and moving funding away from those things that don't. Specifically, we need to transform crisis response, transportation enforcement, and scale up enforcement of property crimes and enforcement of our gun safety laws.
All right. So, I also think that the question presupposes that we need a basic level of officers in each of our precincts. And I want to challenge us, particularly in this civil rights moment, to think about this differently. It's not about the number of bodies we have occupying seats, the number of guns that are represented on the force. It's about the quality of service, about what we expect our officers to deliver for community. And my expectation as mayor would be that you do not engage in the use of deadly force or bias racial policing in our communities. And so I think there's an important strategy here to look at alternatives to law enforcement, like the Community Service Officer Program, which I will continue to expand.
So as we reimagine what the new police department will look like, and we reimagine where a gun and badge will go, we'll also look at 7-minute response times, a restoration of that, and we will have an effective police department. Our strategy to recruit officers at the right level will be centered around 3 strategies. Number 1 is the pay. This is always an incentive, and we pay one of the best salaries. The second part is recognition, making sure that as we change a culture, we recognize the effect of officers and we denounce conduct that is not going to be part of our culture. And the third one, as studies would show, is officers want ability to create. People want an ability to build trust. And so under my leadership, we're going to change the narrative and we're going to get a new kind of officer in our police department.
So I think the important thing to really start with is, yes, we must acknowledge that the current policing system does not work. We must invest in alternatives. But to speak directly to this question as to why police officers are leaving, I think one of the biggest reasons is accountability. We've started to enforce accountability measures, and the officers that currently don't want to be a part of the reform that is necessary for our currently police department are choosing to leave. One of the other things that I have acknowledged and have been aware of is that Interim Chief Diaz decided that in order to staff and have a minimum amount of number of officers that are on patrol, he chose to take officers that were in specialized positions and put them on patrol. I can tell you that it doesn't matter who you work for. If you're in a specialized position only to be essentially demoted, you're not going to want to be a part of that system anymore. And so I feel like that was a wrong decision and that we actually need to engage with officers as to what they'd like to do.
Okay, the first thing that I would try to do is to work with the command staff and the police guild to change the culture. The second thing is to try to get the funding levels back where they need to be and reallocate funding within the department to provide officers with the things that they need to be successful. The third thing is doing more of outreach to the community so we can have a community policing strategy where everyone is working together to come up with alternatives to how we should police. And to fill the void of losing officers, a long-term solution is to create the public safety youth academy where we will try to encourage our young people to look at going into a career of a first respondent, mainly a police officer.
First of all, the police department I've worked with for 45 years. We got an award with National Crime Prevention Council on racial profiling. The Seattle Police Department knows me well. I used to carry my daughter in my arm, who's now a state trooper in Tennessee, from the work that I did with police. Restructuring the department is very important. Working with the community is very important. Taking officers and putting them in classes before they hit the street to learn the community and cultural training is important. Mentoring and monitoring is important. And last of all, remember, there's criminal justice and there's social justice. So the police department will be divided into 2 areas, and that's how we get results and new officers.
The number one issue that people talk to me about when I'm knocking on doors or making phone calls is public safety. The fact is, people across Seattle don't feel safe. And the crime statistics show us that. Every single category of crime is up across the city. Crimes committed with a gun up over 30% than they were a year ago. At the same time, we've lost 300 cops because of a rob Peter to pay Paul approach led by the Seattle City Council over this past year. We've lost the equivalent of not just the Southeast, but the South precincts. We have to hire more cops, period. We're down 300 police officers. But the question is not who we're hiring and what we're hiring them into. And that's really the opportunity. The best opportunity we have to begin to shift the culture of policing in Seattle immediately is by recruiting the right kind of officers from our communities that share our values. And that is what I'll be committed to as mayor.
Thank you all. The next question is still on the topic of.
You didn't get me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I knew I was going to make that mistake. Mr. Donaldson.
Thank you for the question. The reason our police officers are leaving in near record numbers is because they don't feel the support of our elected officials in Seattle, city council, mayor's office, also prosecuting attorney. They don't feel that they have the support of those three entities. And so I, as mayor, make no secret, I'm a friend of the police. I'm supportive of our police department. I think we need to have sign-on bonuses to recruit new officers. And in exchange for that sign-on bonus, they sign an agreement with the city for 2 years of service. If they leave in 2 years, they give that sign-on bonus back, reward good officers, punish the bad ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next question is also on the topic of crime and safety. And this one was suggested by our co-sponsors, the West Seattle Junction Association. The West Seattle Junction Association is an organization full of small businesses. The small businesses have had a lot to deal with street disorder, basically. They've had to deal with burglaries. They've had to deal with people wandering into their businesses and wreaking havoc. If you are walking the streets and talking to one of these businesses, what do you tell them about your strategy in terms of dealing with this situation? Ms. Farrell.
Thank you very much. And again, my basic value around this is that every single person in our community should feel safe. And that includes small business owners, that includes people who are living unhoused. And so a strategy has to include two pieces. One is for those folks who are unhoused in our community. I think there's probably a lot of consensus. We need more interim housing. We need more mental and behavioral health services. We need 3,500 units of permanent supportive housing. And we need to really scale up those programs that use caseworkers, trusted messengers to deliver and build trusted relationships with folks. Bakersfield, California has done this. San Diego is doing this. We've done it in our own community. And we really need to lean into those strategies that help people get the services that they need.
Can you restate the question, please?
The question was, in short, street disorder has both crime and also people wandering into small shops and wreaking havoc during crisis, basically. It's causing a lot of trouble for small businesses. What would you tell the small business person about your strategy? Councilmember González.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Appreciate it. So, I've lived in the Junction just across the street here since 2006. And so 2011, God, I lived on the other side of the block since then. But I've been a longtime resident of the Junction. And so I have an opportunity to actually call many of these small business owners my friends. And I think that my response to them is that the answer is not to increase the presence of law enforcement. The answer is to do things like, for example, bring Health One Mobile right here to West Seattle. We have it in downtown. We have 2 other mobile units to deal with low acuity needs. That's what West Seattle needs.
Thank you. Well, I've been doing a lot of small business tours throughout the city. And in addition to street disorder, there are many other impediments that the city has either put into place by action or inaction, other impediments, such as the use of the built environment not being as creative as we could. With respect to street disorder in particular, this goes to where we need to examine where a gun and badge needs to go and does not need to go. A lot of these folks causing the havoc, they need help. And so my use of either MID ambassadors or community service officers walking the streets, knowing the community, knowing who the sort of frequent flyers are, building relationships to get them the urgent help. We'll also look at another system outside of 911 to give urgent help when needed in those situations.
So for myself, what I really lean into is being honest and direct about why we have this issue in the first place. And that is something where we have lacked the federal investments that are absolutely necessary to truly provide for every single individual, not just here in Seattle, but in most of our cities. Unfortunately, we on the ground are directly dealing with this locally, and we just don't have the resources that we need. That being said, what can we do as a city? For me, that is really focused on preventative care and resources. That means providing tiny homes so that people who are currently unsheltered have places where they can have permanence, can build relationships, and have the resources that they need in order to exit out of homelessness. But that also means providing things like a universal basic income pilot. That way people do not have to commit crimes of poverty in the first place.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do have different options to help individuals based on their situation as to why they wander into a business and come out. But you also have to keep in mind there's some individuals who commit crimes and steal things and shoplift and what have you. So to deal with those, which is what I'm hearing mostly from the small business community, we have to have some type of creative consequence for those who commit any type of crime, property crime against these businesses, because the complaint is that they're not being prosecuted or not even being presented with a consequence for their action. So we have to work closely with the city attorney on these misdemeanor charges to make sure we're creative to come up with some type of sanction to send a message that this type of behavior will not be tolerated.
I'm going to establish something by saying something that I've said before, and you may hear others say it because it's good. Restructuring, auditing, forensic audit. Every department has to be looked at. When it comes to the business zone downtown, understand it's about business. It's about tourism. It's not about homelessness. Seattle is not a city of homelessness. We have to clear that up. We have to understand that Seattle is a city destined for greatness, destined for new ideas, destined for new business.
Well, my response to those small business owners is the same I tell homeowners too. You know, enough is enough, right? Property crime is up across the city. And I think we need to stop making excuses about it. We need to have a multidimensional solution to a very complex problem. But it also means we have to enforce laws on the books. We have to invest in programs that help to disrupt street level crime. And we have to hold folks accountable while making other investments and alternatives, while making the crisis response system better. But at the end of the day, I can't stand in a Rite Aid and watch a guy come in and swipe a 6-pack of beer and say that's okay. While I'm standing there with my 7-year-old who's watching that and see no consequences, his brain's now rewired to say, I can do the same thing. That doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't make our community safer.
I was a small business owner for 28 years, 5 years with a location in Seattle Central District on 22nd and Jackson, ground floor level from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. So we saw a lot of street disturbances from time to time. Albeit using the police department for those kind of situations is a little bit of overkill. So I would work with our neighborhood business associations, make sure that they have adequate resources to hire rent-a-cops or community liaison people who can intervene, get the information on these disturbances, file a report, and be sure to keep an eye on these kind of things. That would make the neighborhoods and the businesses feel a lot more safe than they do. Thank you.
Well, I am a small business owner and I grew up in small business. And so when I hear a small business is suffering and hurting and because of what's going on, I immediately will say as mayor, I will take responsibility and I will support you and ensure that you can thrive in your business. There are many ways that we can do this. We've already mentioned Health One. Absolutely. We have people out there who are suffering with mental and behavioral health issues. Let's be clear, they are in anguish, and our city government has allowed this to happen. We have to do more. We have a plan that calls for 100 outreach workers. That's based out in the geographical areas around the city where there are issues that are going on, so that our businesses are supported and we are taking care of those felt human needs that are out there.
Thank you all. Ever since the West Seattle Bridge has closed, West Seattle has been particularly awash in traffic offenses. As tempers have risen, we've had road rage, we've had speeding, more so than your standard neighborhood complaints about such thing. So in the light of that, we're curious on everybody's opinions of the Inspector General's suggestion that traffic stops not be made in many cases, starting with Councilmember González.
All right. I am very supportive of the Inspector General's report and recommendations to have SPD no longer engage in traffic enforcement. I don't believe that her report said that no traffic enforcement should occur at all. I think the point is that armed law enforcement should not be engaging in traffic enforcement, because we know that is one of the top ways in which that law enforcement interaction results in biased policing or the use of force, including deadly violence. So if you think of all of the incidents we've been seeing across the nation, many of those started as a traffic stop. And so I would be supportive of making sure that we are looking at a non-armed law enforcement way of achieving compliance with our traffic laws.
So I was the sole sponsor of an interesting law called the bias-free policing law in Seattle, because I want to know who is getting stopped to begin with. I want the data to speak for itself, to see if there's racial profiling, if there's some injustices that we need to address through policy. With respect to the Inspector General's suggestion, I would agree that what we've seen throughout this country is how routine traffic stops have resulted in unnecessary deaths and murders. So yes, we will take a strong look at how we do that. We will consider alternatives to a gun and badge stopping people. We do need safe streets. Make no mistake about that. So the question is not sacrificing our safety, making sure we have the right skill set, a master at de-escalation, enforcing our traffic laws.
So I would say that, yes, I am also in support of the Inspector General's decision to not want to engage in enforcement, specifically because of the state-sponsored violence that occurs when police engage in that. That being said, I believe that one of the biggest issues that we are dealing with is really that our environment is designed for people to drive as quickly as possible through all of our neighborhoods. It's something that has become extremely apparent, where even as we have reduced the speed in most of our neighborhoods down to, I want to say, 25 miles per hour now, we still see people going as fast as 40 miles an hour. And I can tell you as a pedestrian that I don't feel safe. And even as someone who relies on walking around, I know that our current systems are not safe for most people. And so we need to invest more money in actually redesigning our streets so that people can feel safe to walk, bike, and roll across both every neighborhood in West Seattle and in the rest of Seattle.
I think in looking at the decision, it should be some options put in place where it can be imposed if there are certain officers who have shown some biases in stops or have biases that have been identified, which means that you have the option to keep those particular officers from doing any type of stops. But certain officers who are armed will understand that they don't use their weapons unless it's absolutely necessary. But whenever you make stops, you never know what's going to happen. And it's better to be safe than sorry, to have someone to be ready to respond and not have any equipment and cannot respond and defend themselves. So I think it needs to build, some options need to be considered to given to the states and the cities of how they want to implement that policy.
So my daughter controls 2 counties in Tennessee. She graduated 92 percentile, top of her class recently, 6 months ago. She's now on graveyard. She called me, she said, "Dad, I have people that sometimes won't look at me. They're Black, they won't look at me. So I tell them to look at my hands. And then they see that I'm the same color they are." I want to apologize to West Seattle for this bridge. Hot concrete does not cure properly. We have a problem. It will be fixed. But understand, I believe the city needs to compensate for all the stuff that West Seattle is going through, dealing with construction and the bridge. I'll be there for you.
Well, first, I want to just say, I fully support, advancing our Vision Zero, the city's Vision Zero plan for safe streets and safe opportunities to move throughout our transportation network. I lived in Washington, D.C. for a long time. We had red light cameras, we had speed cameras, we had a number of other intelligent transportation systems deployed across the city to do exactly what folks are talking about, is reduce the number of interactions with law enforcement in a routine traffic stop. And I do think that's something we need to do more of. City council needs to pass laws to get us away from some of the surveillance issues that folks have raised over the years. But this is where, if we want to actually make changes, we got to look at what the laws on the books are and make sure we open them up to create more opportunities. But I agree, less officers making stops is better for everybody.
Yes, speaking of laws in the books, I mean, I agree that we need to enforce our laws in the books. If we don't like our laws in the books, we need to change them, amend them. We have the power to do that. And so we need to take a look at those and make sure that we know exactly what the laws say. To have an inspector general come in and override all that and say no more stops, no more this or that, that's not the right way to go about the process. We all need to have some buy-in with this as community citizens here. Also, using police officers to do traffic stops is a little bit of overkill as well. So I would be much more in favor of using officers who are not armed and are well trained in traffic stops. Thank you.
Yeah, I support the Inspector General. Absolutely. I think that traffic stops do not need to happen with armed officers. And I think we can do some really good work about getting some jobs into the community and making sure that these are community people who are doing these traffic stops. But I do think that we need to address the traffic out here in West Seattle is really hard, and that there are communities who are struggling. I worry about, ambulances and other kinds of emergency vehicles trying to get through some of the streets out here. And so as mayor, I would be doing all we could to alleviate the pain of the loss of the West Seattle Bridge, getting more transit out here so that you all can get to where you need to go and get there as quick as you can. And then also be asking SDOT to do some analysis on making the streets safer.
Thank you very much. I too support the Inspector General's recommendations. And I think, the good news around transportation is that we can transform our public safety system. We can improve mobility, and we can make sure that we have safe streets when we are both designing our neighborhood streets to make sure that they are safe for all users. And I know that that's particularly acute in a lot of neighborhoods in West Seattle right now as traffic is diverted because of the bridge. So we need to act really with urgency to make sure that we're using street treatments to make drivers go slower through our neighborhoods in particular. We need to decriminalize part of our transportation system, whether it's things like jaywalking or fare enforcements. And quite frankly, we need to be moving to free transit. So when we combine both policy and physical investments in our road infrastructure, we can actually get to all of these goals at once.
Thank you all. And that segues us into the bridge. First question about the bridge is, so it will not be open yet unless something amazing happens by the time one of you or the people who aren't here takes office at the start of next year. So the question is, as mayor, what would you do to ensure that the West Seattle Bridge is reopened no later than mid-2022 as currently promised? Mr. Harrell.
Well, I think that we are on track, but to ensure that, we'll make sure that we open up the data once again so you can look at the milestones to measure us against. You will see achievable milestones. We will also have a cabinet level position to make sure that any more available funds, whether they're ARPA funds or any kind of funds that Biden has been aggressively releasing for transportation projects, that we are in line. We are a city on the map of this country, and our major infrastructure projects like that one are critical to our success. And so you will see an aggressive pursuit of available federal and state funds as well, in addition to opening up the data so you could see our milestones that we will reach.
So the thing I rely on is the fact that in my architecture practice and in my history, I have been an excellent project manager. I've actually worked for clients who have asked me to take over construction administration for other projects because I help bring projects on time and under budget. And so it's something where I am more than happy to actively engage in the West Seattle Bridge and make sure that decisions that are made at a timely measure. For example, Mayor Durkin waited until the last minute to decide whether or not we should build a new bridge or repair the current bridge. And I felt that that actually was to the detriment of the people living here in West Seattle. The other thing that I am extremely focused on is restoring transit service to what it was before the COVID pandemic. And so I am committed to putting buses back on the ballot in 2022 so that we can have the service that is absolutely necessary while we continue to repair the bridge.
So this is an opportunity because of COVID to go back and take a look at the levy, to reprioritize some projects so we can free up some money to go toward the West Seattle Bridge. In addition to continue to pursue federal, state resources to try to make sure we get the funding, But this is also an opportunity to create partnerships with our corporate community to get them to make donations directly to the city to fill any funding gap as quick as possible. So once we identified the funding we can get and we have, let's go to them and get them to buy into this very important project. West Seattle is a very important part of the city. It needs to be reconnected by the bridge. Everybody needs to buy into this and mainly get the difference from our corporate community through the donations directly to the city for this project.
I'm from originally Detroit, Michigan. I don't know how a lot of people were raised, but I've always had a plan A, B, C, and I include a D plan because usually it's a Donovan plan. When it comes to the bridge, there is a problem, but I know we can resolve it. But you know, I've worked transit for 40 years, King County Metro Transit for 40 years. And what I do know personally is restructuring a way there needs to be more than one in and out area for West Seattle that's major, because pandemics, disasters, we will lose half of West Seattle if we don't work this out together. The funding's coming from Biden, and I will work with that.
You know, the top bridge experts in the world still can't tell us why the bridge cracked. And so, you know, I think it's super critical that, you know, as mayor, we keep that project on track. We try to work as hard as we can to deliver it sooner, but we want to make sure that those repairs are the right repairs and ensure that that bridge will be here for a long, long time. The second thing is we got to focus on the lower bridge too. The lower bridge is taking more traffic now than it was designed to do. We need to, you know, leverage every kind of resource available to be able to invest in that lower bridge and all of the other infrastructure that is taking on way more traffic than it was designed to do as a result of all the rerouting through West Seattle. But we got to get West Seattle reconnected to the rest of the city, and I will be ready to be your partner in that process.
Transportation infrastructure in this city and this region is critical. It's got to be a top priority of the other 2 or 3 priorities that we are always talking about. I was trying to make a lunch yesterday in DuPont on I-5 South, didn't even make it the Federal Way by the time traffic turned into a parking lot and turned around and came back. We cannot afford to have this continue happening. The West Seattle Bridge needs to be replaced. I will be, as a mayor, cajoling, pressuring, pestering the federal government nonstop, politically speaking, of course, to make sure that we get the funding from that infrastructure bill that Biden is trying to push through and put that money towards the bridges like West Seattle and the Magnolia Bridge as well. Thank you.
You know, I've been an executive director of a nonprofit for the past 7 years, and I can tell you that if I had let a major part of our infrastructure of our organization come down like this, I would have been fired by my board of directors. And I take infrastructure very, very seriously. I believe that the mayor of Seattle should be focused and keeping all of our infrastructure on track, from potholes to bridges. And that's what I can commit to as mayor of the city. I think around keeping the bridge on track, I will be personally holding SDOT accountable. I'll be watching for every single dollar because these projects often come in over budget. You can do everything you want. I've been building housing. You can do everything you can sometimes to keep it under budget, but things often go under budget, and I will search out every single dollar to make sure that this project comes in on time.
So mobility in West Seattle was really hard before the bridge disaster, and it is even harder and more acute now. And it's really a travesty that mobility concerns have not been adequately addressed by the city for this community. And it has environmental, economic, and quality of life consequences that people in this community are facing right now. And as mayor, I commit to using my experience. I was a leader of a transportation organization. I was the vice chair of the transportation committee as a legislator. I helped put in place $80 billion of new funding for transportation. Lack of funding should never be an excuse because the funding is there for other projects. And as leader of this city, I will make sure that we get this bridge put back in order as soon as we can.
So out of all these candidates, I'm probably the most motivated to get the West Seattle Bridge open since I live in West Seattle, and I have been working really hard as a current city council member to work with our regional partners, our federal partners, and community to make sure that we continue to identify the funding needed to make sure we get this bridge across the finish line. The good news is we have been able to have a lot of success in getting all of the funding we need to be able to get this repair over the finish line. So really it's about safety. It's really about the project management, which SDOT is responsible for. Of course, they answer to the mayor. But let's be really clear here. Under no circumstances, if I'm elected mayor, will that bridge reopen if a single life may be lost as a result of it not being ready to be open. That has to be our guiding force. Is the bridge ready to be opened without collapse? So my hope is that'll be accomplished.
Thank you. Also on the subject of the West Seattle Bridge. Okay. Okay, who did I miss? I didn't. Yeah, I'm writing down little notes, trying to keep track of this unusual questioning order. Okay, on to the next one, and Mr. Houston will be the first to answer this one. Will you order an investigation into how we got to the point where the bridge had to be closed on an emergency basis?
I would say generally yes, and I believe we already are doing that. The other thing that I'm really concerned about are the other existing bridges that need to be replaced, specifically the Ballard Bridge and the Magnolia Bridge. We've also had a lot of issues with the Montlake Bridge as well, and so it's something where we need to really have a deep dive into all of our existing bridges in order to come up with a plan for those replacements. A lot of them are existing infrastructure that has been there for a long time, and just like many things that were built through the previous New Deal, they need to be replaced. And so we need to be able to collect that data, that information, in order to understand what is the best way to move forward, not just with replacing those bridges, but also providing replacements that expand the amount of mobility that can occur across them, specifically for people walking, biking, and rolling.
The answer to your question is yes. We need an investigation to find out why this happened, and that investigation needs to start in the mayor's office all the way down to SDOT, including city council. But the other thing we need to do is make sure that we have a plan in place to make sure that we inspect over 100 bridges that we have around the city to make sure that this never happens again to any of our bridges, and then prioritize putting together a 25-year transportation infrastructure improvement strategy to make sure we are able to collect dollars, put them in place, so whenever we have some challenges with our bridges, we're prepared to address those challenges and we have the money that we need to make the repairs and improvements.
The question that is so deeply on everyone's mind is, how did this happen? Poor construction. I grew up doing construction, foundation work, waterproofing. I used to drive by on I-5 and see the smoke of the cement, knowing that it was hot concrete. It's not going to dry well in cold weather. So I agree it needs to be an investigation, but why investigate if you're not going to come out with the results and do something favorable for the community and for the lack of people being able to move freely? That's what I'll be looking at.
I think, anytime you have a piece of infrastructure that's compromised, you got to take a deep dive and try to understand what happened and apply it to those lessons learned to the rest of the infrastructure. I don't think going and trying to find a boogeyman is going to be the thing that helps us move forward, because the fact of the matter is the bridge was closed before anyone got hurt. And that, I think, is the most important thing. No, that bridge did not collapse and no one lost their life as a result of it. But what we need to do is channel that energy and channel the resources into the other bridge infrastructure we have across the city. And again, channel more resources into the infrastructure in West Seattle to make sure that we use this as a learning lesson to create better in and out opportunities for folks here in this part of the city.
The city of Seattle is built over a network of waterways, and so our bridges are a vital part of our infrastructure. I am for a thorough investigation, and I would bring in outside investigators as well, be it on the federal level or even globally. Bring in some folks who are experts in these fields who can put their heads together in a committee and really come up with the best assessment of what happened. Just like the condo collapse in Surfside, Florida. These buildings and bridges look beautiful from the outside, but you never know structurally how integral they are. If they have a flaw, Those flaws need to be detected and written upon on the report and then acted upon, not kicked down the road a few years. Thank you.
Yes, I absolutely support finding a way to figure out what happened. I think we owe it to our city, we owe it to West Seattle to make sure that we have systems in place so these kinds of incidences do never happen again. I know that we have other infrastructure in our city that is failing, and it is important for SDOT to be held accountable. It's important that they create new systems and capacity to ensure that we are keeping our communities safe, that our bridges work, that our roads work, and that everyone who lives out here in West Seattle can access downtown when they need it and when they need to get down there for work or for whatever you might be doing. This is a priority for me. The mayor of the city is an executive and needs to have executive function around these kinds of systems.
This is really an issue of public trust. I think this is a moment in our city where people are really angry about our inability to move forward on basic things like infrastructure, as well as our biggest issues like homelessness and climate change and gun violence. And so absolutely, an investigation is a mechanism, an important tool to have accountability. Even if there was no wrongdoing, we can always do better in our assessment and our delivery of these really important basic government services. And that is what this is about right now. We've been so successful over the last 15 years in raising more transportation funding because we have delivered on our promises with the voters. And when we fall down on that, the voters don't want to say yes to more funding. So that's a real priority, making sure we're delivering on our promises.
I don't think it's a wise use of resources or time to launch an investigation about what went wrong on a bridge that was built 40 years ago. I do think, however, it is important for us to make sure that we have a full audit of exactly how we discovered the cracks in the first place and whether or not we could have detected it sooner. So real time, would we have been able to catch the infrastructure failing sooner? I think that is a much better part of the system failure to focus on, as opposed to who built the bridge when and did it go right or did it go wrong? I mean, we know the answer to that question. It went wrong. And so now we need to focus on how do we repair it? How do we open it up in time? And we do that by staying squarely focused on the repair.
I think an investigation is very appropriate. For what purpose, though? Not to denigrate anyone, but to prevent it from happening again. I want you to think about an organizational triangle, if you will, and you think about the executive, the city council, and the departments. Notwithstanding the fact that, of course, there's the court system and the inspector general and the auditor and hearing examiner outside of that, the communication system broke down. And I think this is where leadership style is going to be critical, because people that work with me will know that I'm not trying to do a gotcha, but I want to look at the systems to make sure that not only do we learn from our mistakes, but that we can empower one another to prevent them from happening again, which is the most critical thing we have to learn out of this exercise.
Thank you. Another topic that's particularly hot citywide would be homelessness. So I'd like to ask you all whether you support or oppose the upcoming potentially ballot measure charter amendment number 29, aka Compassion Seattle, as called by its supporters, and why you have the position that you have. Mr. Randall.
So first of all, I would like to say I think it's a shame that we had to have citizens to come up with a strategy and have to offer to change our charter to address this issue. But the votes have, I mean, not the votes, but the signatures have been gathered and it will be on the ballot in November. I think that no matter what happens, whether it's approved or not, won't have an impact on my strategies, because I have a very specific plan that I want to put in place to try to address those who are living on the streets in tents and in RVs. So if it passes, that means more money to go toward my project. If it doesn't pass, I will continue to move forward with this project. But at this particular time, this is in the hands of the voters, and whatever comes out of it, I will make happen what needs to happen.
Well, Mr. Harrell, you were part of the council, and furthermore, you were part of management of the council. So all I can say is got you. The system is on homelessness put to an area of understanding the mindset of those that are out there. It's more than just drugs. We have to understand the mindset and understand it's an untapped area of resources. On top of that, I'm bringing a 3L program. It's time this city listen, learn, and then lead.
I support the charter amendment. I think it's an important step forward in helping us push past semantics to focus on actually getting the job done, creating more housing, connecting people with services, holding folks accountable, having a more intentional approach to how we are actually getting folks off the streets into safer spaces and returning parks and our streets back to what they're intended to do. As mayor, I'll work to fine tune it to make sure it meets the needs of our communities. But I think it's an important statement from the majority of our citizens that they are ready to see change. As the fact is, our current system, which has been built up over the last 20 years, is not getting the job done. It's not transparent. It's not accountable. It doesn't have the data that we need to be able to make decisions that get better outcomes.
I'm glad that Mr. Sixkiller actually answered the question. Yes, I support the charter amendment. In general, especially in regards to building additional housing, this is what we need. The ordinances currently are, we cannot take people off the streets unless we have a place to put them. So to build additional housing, be it tiny homes or affordable housing, what have you, hotels that are going to be renovated for shelters, is all in favor with what I'm looking at. I'm all about intervening with our homeless population. I want to find out who they are, what they're suffering from, and be able to provide those services that are needed once we get them off the street and into the adequate housing that they need. Thank you very much.
So I do not support Compassion Seattle, but I understand why people wanted it because I'm in the same place. I'm running for mayor because I am a national expert on homelessness and I am so frustrated and angry that our homeless crisis has continued to grow year after year after year. Even after 5 years ago, we declared a state of emergency around homelessness. You know, best practice calls for those experiencing homelessness to actually be leading the way forward. And they were not consulted when the Compassion Seattle initiative came forward. So that's the main reason I'm not voting for it. However, I'm also not voting for it because I have a great plan. I want to invite you to check out our website. We have a 22-point plan to bring everybody inside in 14 months. I know how to do it. This is why I'm running for mayor, and we need to have an expert in the mayor's office who knows how to solve this crisis.
The fact that there's an initiative on the ballot is a real expression of the frustration that we all have around the lack of forward movement and addressing this humanitarian crisis. And I support the charter amendment because it puts forth a consensus path on how to address this crisis. I do not support sweeps, and this charter amendment does not mandate sweeps, but it is, in terms of implementation, only as good as the next mayor. The main benefit of this, though, is that it will create context where we can stop wringing our hands, we can stop fighting about what it is that needs to be done, and go do it. We know we need more interim housing, more services, more permanent supportive housing, more caseworkers who know people are unhoused by name. It is time to go get the job done.
So I do not support Charter Amendment 29. I believe that it's an unfunded mandate. It has absolutely 0% revenue source associated with it, which means that the next mayor will be put in the unfortunate situation of having to cut vital services in other places in the general fund in order to fulfill the mandate. I think there are different ways we can achieve the goals of building more housing. And frankly, this charter amendment, while it has the lofty goal of creating 2,000 additional shelter or affordable housing options, there are 4,000 people sleeping outside of shelters every night in the city of Seattle. So it's not enough. We need to have a real solution that doesn't actually put sweeps at the center of it, which the ACLU of Washington has already come out saying it does, in fact, memorialize and legalize sweeps in our city. So I do not support Charter Amendment 29.
I do support Charter 29 for a variety of reasons. Number one, it requires a published plan. And I think that's what the voters and the people want. They want to see the progress. It does require specifically 2,000 built units. I think it's inhumane to let people live in tents without water, without heat. I think under our Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we have embraced as a city, and not all cities have done that, that we have to aggressively help people, get them to individualized case management. It requires 12% of our budget in HSD to go toward this problem. And that's why I called for higher federal funds to address this issue. This is the crisis of the hour. Inaction is unacceptable. It also has a criminal diversion component to it such that we will not criminalize poverty, but we need action.
So I am vehemently against the charter amendment, and I have been since the very beginning. And one of the biggest issues with it that I have that has not been brought up yet is the fact that the Lived Experience Coalition was not a part of the process in actually constructing this. It's something where if you are actually trying to help people who are most marginalized, those people should be at the table and part of the solution for themselves. The other thing that I really want to focus on here is that whatever solution comes from any of us, what I am really focused on is the preventative aspect. If you look at the point in time count from the past 4 years, you'll see that our unhoused population in King County has been about the same. So we're being somewhat successful in terms of bringing people out of homelessness. What we're not good at is preventing people from falling into homelessness. And that is what I am concerned with and what I am focused on so that we can finally break the cycle for so many people in our city.
Thank you. The next question is an issue that's so much bigger than just the city, and yet West Seattle is home to both frequent orca sightings, and it's also home to one of the city's last remaining salmon streams, Fauntleroy Creek. So as mayor, what's one thing that you think you can and would do to try to help the plight of both endangered orcas and endangered salmon? Mr. Rivers.
Me first? Okay. Actually, because of being Choctaw and my people actually organized the whole Native Tribes organization, that history is there with me. I think one of the most important things about understanding the First Nation people is being involved with them and knowing their culture and knowing exactly what are the most important things. Our orca are very important. They let us know how that water is out there. Our salmon, they're very important. They let us know if we have food and we'll be provided food. So it's important for us to understand that we must work together across cultural barriers.
As a chief operating officer at King County, I worked alongside Dow in creating the Clean Water Healthy Habitat Initiative to focus specifically on how we begin to align programs and services and to support critical habitat, protect critical habitat, and ensure both salmon and other species can continue to thrive and be part of our ecosystem here in the Northwest. We have to do the same thing in the city of Seattle: is refocus and prioritize across, especially the built environment that we have as a city that we oversee, and to really, ensure that our policies and our investments are going toward those types of things, whether it's green infrastructure, how we're managing our water and wastewater systems, and really though grounding it in achieving that really important goal.
As a person who's studied environmental impacts over the last 35 years, hence the reason I've been vegetarian for 35 years, I really have an affinity for all of our natural wildlife around Seattle, especially our orcas, our salmon. As mayor, I would go steps further to make sure that we ensure protection for them, for the waterways that they're traversing up and down, for the Elliott Bay itself, making sure it's clean, trying to stop this raw sewage runoff that is polluting our waters. These are things that are near and dear to my heart, and I would do everything in my power as mayor to lead the way in these efforts. Thank you.
I think the way that we'll know that we've turned the corner on climate change is when the Salish Sea is full of orcas, because then we know that our rivers are clean and abundant and full of salmon. And then we know that that kid out in the south end who's experienced high rates of asthma is actually breathing clean and wonderful air. And so this is a priority for me as mayor. I've worked very closely with the tribes in this area for a very long time, and we'll work with them again to ask for their leadership, that they can be leading us, because they have actual relationship with the orcas, and I believe in their leadership there. We have to reduce our emissions. We've talked about it in the city over and over and over again for so long. We have to have a change maker in the mayor's office who will actually do it. I'm proud to be endorsed by the urbanists because they see my passion and my vision and the way that I have incorporated this in my work. Thank you.
Living in a community where we get to see orcas is really one of the most special things about living in Seattle. And, it's hard to just focus on one thing. So I'm going to kind of say we need to really make sure that orcas have food, which means really preserving and protecting salmon habitat. That means working with the state to do fish passage removal. It means getting people out of their cars. There was a study recently that showed that the chemicals from tires are really deadly to salmon. And so the good news about helping get people out of our cars is it's better for our health, it's better for climate change, combating carbon emissions, and it really is something that will help preserve and protect salmon, which feed orca. So that's going to be a real priority for me.
I think a lot of the things that my fellow candidates have said are absolutely spot on, but I want to make it a little bit more specific to West Seattle. West Seattle is the home to a lot of polluters. We have a mixture of both maritime and industrial industries here in West Seattle, from Nucor to just about everything in South Park, and all of that really does impact the quality of our air and the quality of our water. So as mayor, I think the area that I can have the greatest influence on is to work with those particular industries to identify a clear way to transition them away from unsustainable industries towards a greener, more sustainable economy that will benefit all of us in this environment.
So in looking at this plight, I think we have to understand the city's role. And the city's role, I think, in this particular situation, dealing with the orcas and the salmon, will be, number one, to look at our individual behavior, whether we are using plastics or banning them, where we're using detergents that are not environmentally sensitive, et cetera. So that's what the city can do to make sure, first of all, we have the right environmental policies. Second, there is a whole ecosystem of people, nonprofits, nationwide groups doing tremendous work in this area. We have to be some of their strongest partners. We have to find them the funding. We have to bring awareness to it, which is my third point, bringing awareness to the seriousness of the situation. A lot of people are still oblivious to the issues of salmon habitat in our orcas. And so we have to evangelize the struggle as well.
So the number one thing that I will do as mayor is focus on reducing vehicle miles traveled. And to touch a little bit on what has been discussed in the past, whether you drive a car that uses gas or electric, all cars have brake dust. That brake dust gets into our systems and creates a toxin that destroys salmon. And so it is absolutely imperative that we get people to drive less. And I know that that is something very politically unpopular. However, if we want to be the city that we always say that we are, which loves salmon and loves orca, we need to drive less. What that means is that we need to focus on getting people to shift away from driving cars onto transit and bikes, but also that we need land use reform so that people have all the things that they need for their daily life within an easy walk, bike, or roll. That is why I have the endorsement of 350 Seattle and the action, and why I'm focused on climate justice.
Two things that I would do. First is to upgrade our stormwater management systems to make sure that we can stop the runoff from the bridges and the roads going into the Puget Sound, which damages the wildlife. And also to seek some federal funding from the EPA to be able to do some research to take a look at the sediments in our waterways, and also to the investigation to see what type of pollution is in our waterways on the bottom that could potentially come up and do damage to our orcas, and make sure that we put a plan in action to try to clean up some of those sediments, whether it's plastics or what have you, but we need to do a better job of paying attention to that.
Thank you. On the subject of housing, currently there's much talk that single-family housing should be ended. So, do you support, oppose, or what's your view on that? Starting with Mr. Sixkiller.
Thanks. That's a very it is a topic that comes up across the city in every community that I'm meeting with today. And no, I don't support replacing one size fits all approach with another one size fits all approach. I think we need to be much more intentional about where we are upzoning and rezoning to allow for density where it makes sense. We need to do more to build missing middle housing. But I think it really needs to be focused on those corridors that can take it. I think we need to look at underdeveloped commercial corridors for rezone. But I also, want to be really clear that, we have to preserve the housing we have, and by going through and creating pathways for that to be removed, I just don't think works for the future of Seattle.
We are a geographically landlocked city here, and so much land available only. People have worked long and hard to have their individual single residence homes, and I am not in favor of doing away with that and replacing it with something else. I'm much more in favor of creating a blend and a mix of mixed use, or changing our zoning and regulations and those kind of things, finding areas and pockets in all of our various great neighborhoods where we can build additional multifamily homes and those kind of things. That's what I'm in favor of. Like Casey just said, one size fit all being replaced by another one size fit all is not the way to go.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I worked alongside some of my staff, the T Seattle Club, in our day center. And I remember talking very clearly with a young woman who has 2 children, was busing in and out of Seattle every single day because she could not afford to live in the city. And she was taking care of some of the most vulnerable people in the city without proper protection. That is wrong. That's not who this city really is. This is a city that believes in justice and believes in equity. And if we believe that, then we're going to have to change our zoning laws. I believe that this is time for us to be thinking about density. It's time for us to think about building out those apartments, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, sixplexes, and let's make this a city where everyone can live, where we value diversity, where we value our essential workers, where we value working families, and that's what I support.
We all are committed to making this a place where all of us can live. And if we really mean that, then we need to be building a lot more housing. 70,000 units of affordable housing is what the gap is in this community. And so changing our land use code and undoing the strictures, the straitjacket that we're in around single family zoning is one important tool, but not the only one. And I just want to be really clear around what this could look like if we did that. There are really great examples across our city of what housing diversity could be. You look at High Point and New Holly as places with economic diversity, Thornton Place near Northgate that has a daylighted creek. You really can do this in an environmentally sound way. And all of Seattle that was built before 1923, Fremont, parts of West Seattle, Columbia City. Some of the things that we love best about this city are achievable without single family zones.
I do support abolishing exclusionary zoning in our city. It is rooted fundamentally in old principles and vestiges of redlining. And I think if we are truly a city that is committed to racial equity and justice, we have to get rid of those. This doesn't mean that there won't be a single family home in the city of Seattle. What it does mean is that 80% of the land that is currently residential will be now open to other types and forms of housing that will accept multiple families in one place. It is wrong for us to have 80% of our residential land preserved for the most expensive and least climate-friendly housing, and those are single-family homes that are currently selling at an average price of $850,000. We can do better.
So I think it's very appropriate that we, as a city, have a history and a history lesson on the history of exclusionary zoning to look at the racial impacts, the socioeconomic groups that have been adversely affected by this. And we as a city have this discussion. I think in Minneapolis, as an example, that discussion was had, and they looked at how they can look at single family zoning and have duplexes and triplexes in certain areas, work with the community on a 2040 plan to look at where we still have zoning capacity and can aggressively take advantage of that to achieve affordability around transit-oriented development in certain neighborhoods that make sense. It's important that we still look at access to transit, access to amenities when we make our zoning decisions, and work with the communities.
So I'm pretty sure we've talked about this long enough. In HALA, one of the recommendations made in 2016 was specifically to end single-family zoning. And so this information has been available and has been clearly shown to make the city more affordable. However, the can was kicked down the road, and we are paying for that right now. We have had a homelessness emergency since 2015, and one of the biggest reasons is that we keep displacing people from the city. It is time to end single-family zoning, and as the only candidate who has been clear about ending single-family zoning across the entire city, I believe that it is necessary in order to achieve climate justice now, not later.
So I support working with different neighborhoods to create staggered residential zoning that's based on the conditions of the neighborhood and the property that's being considered for rezoning. And I also believe in creating more flexibility within our single family zonings as it is, so that we can establish different opportunities where you can have reduce the block size as far as what's needed to do a development, and also to create a situation where others who own property can be their own developers. Right now, we haven't created an opportunity where people who have property have been upzoned, they cannot develop their property, so they end up selling it. So we have to create more opportunities for different options for housing, but we also have to create opportunity for those who create wealth who have been upzoned, so that they can be able to stay in the neighborhoods.
I believe this discussion is very important at this time, but we definitely saw this happening. We saw the increase of people moving to Washington State and to Seattle, and we basically did nothing about it. I understand the zoning situations, but I don't believe in taking people's right to be successful and have a dream home or do what they want to do with their lives. I do believe that with the young people coming aboard, they don't think the way we've thought about housing. So we need to get with them and find out what the millenniums, the X and the Ys want, because whatever they purchase, it needs to be able to move from that forward with it.
Okay, so up next, we're going to ask 4 yes/no questions. And just for the sake of organization, for each one of those, we're going to go from Mr. Donaldson on down the table. And again, just a simple yes or no, no maybes, no, whatever. And then closing statements. So yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you all for your patience. All right, first of these 4 questions. Would you initiate having the city annex White Center and the rest of unincorporated North Highline?
Yes or no?
I'll go with yes.
Can you ask the question again? Sorry.
Would you initiate having Seattle annex White Center and the rest of unincorporated North Highline?
No.
Yes.
I wasn't ready. Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and Skyway.
Yes.
All right. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, next one. Are Seattle small businesses?
Yeah, we're gonna go back to Mr. Donaldson's discussion.
Yes, for each one of these questions. Are Seattle small businesses overregulated?
Yes.
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 My lawyer brain is at work here. Yes.
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 Would you support expanding the natural gas ban in new construction to single-family homes?
Wow. I'm going to say yes.
Natural gas ban on single family homes?
No, would it, currently there's the city passed not allowing it in different kinds of, multifamily and commercial construction. So would you
Just
support
put that
extending
yes.
that to-
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, with an equity lens.
Yes, for all construction.
Yes.
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 And the fourth question, the mayor tends to sit on the Sound Transit Board, so that's where the relevance of this question comes. Should Sound Transit consider the Skylink gondola as an alternative to West Seattle Light Rail?
As an alternative, I'll say yes.
Yes to consider, but we've got to have light rail out here.
As an alternative, no.
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 No is an alternative.
Yes.
Yep.
No.
All right, thank you. And now on to closing statements. And this time we'll go from Mr. Sixkiller on down the table. We have 45 seconds again here, anything you want to say.
Well, first, thank you so much to everyone for coming out and for tuning in on Facebook Live. It's just delighted to be here in West Seattle. And of course, every time we come to West Seattle, we're reminded that this neighborhood has really felt the brunt of not just the pandemic, but obviously the closure of the West Seattle Bridge. And that's what this next election is about solving the problems that folks experience every day they walk out their front door. We need to get back to practical solutions that move our community forward, get past semantics and pointing fingers at each other, and just do the hard work of governing and moving our city into a place that we all have and feel a connection to. The reality, though, is that it's also a moment for new leadership. A couple of the folks on this table today have had their hands on the wheel, and things have gotten worse. Now is the time for new folks to tackle these issues, and I'm excited to step into that and have that opportunity.
I bring forth 45 years of behind the scene advising elected officials. Yep, I've been behind them, telling them about multiculturalism and everything else. One thing I will not allow to happen, we're not losing Seattle. If we lose Seattle, we've lost Washington State. This is not a game. Most of these people up here need more training. They're not ready. So we have to make sure we get them prepared for other areas of leadership. Some people here will be on staff, especially my staff, but there's some others that definitely need training, and we have to open the door for young people because they have vibrant ideas to save Seattle, a city of destiny.
So again, I'm glad to have had this opportunity to spend time with you. I will say that I've worked on every level of government, which is unusual among the group that's here today. We all have something to offer, but I have more, and I also have a track record where I've done some things around the city, all over the city, including West Seattle, and helping small businesses, large businesses, and responding to the needs of the residents and the businesses in the city. It's time for us to go in a new direction. While we do appreciate past and present elected officials who have been around for quite some time, it's time to pass the torch so we can have new ideas, new approaches going forward so we can take Seattle to a more vibrant and sustainable future. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to be your next mayor.
I am running in this moment because after 4 years of inaction, I believe that we truly need a mayor of action. And I will say that there are many candidates up here who I believe would be good at being mayor. But in addressing our crises and in truly providing solutions that will actually lift up those who need help most, I believe that I am the best choice. And I say that as someone who is not a career politician and who is not a lawyer, but as someone who is a community organizer and architect. And I believe that in the generation and decade of the Green New Deal, that we need someone who is focused on truly addressing these crises and getting us to become the city that we always say that we are. And so it's time for someone who will empower community to be part of this solution and make Seattle that much better for all of us.
I think the opportunity in front of us is just incredible. That I think Seattle could show this country and indeed this world what a great city could be. We have survived this pandemic, those in this room. Many people did not. We have an opportunity to talk about the race and social justice issues that we've seen in this country to figure out here in Seattle. There's something very special about this Seattle. when we revitalize our small business environment and look at the opportunities that COVID presented us, thinking creatively, bringing the best out of everyone. I hope to be that mayor to simply do that. That's why I don't denigrate my colleagues, past or present. I try to run a message of being positive because I see the opportunity in front of us, and I hope that you'll think of me as your next mayor.
So again, I'm Lorena González, running to be your next mayor. I would be honored to have your support and your vote in this opportunity to represent the city that I love. This is a city that I fell in love with as a fifth grader when I first came out of here on a field trip through my public school in Central Washington, where I grew up as a migrant farm worker in deep, deep poverty and experiencing the effects of climate change and inequality every single day. And this city has given me my shot. It's made it possible for me to become a civil rights attorney, someone who has come up through the ranks in the immigrant rights movement. That's why folks like Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal and Joe Fitzgibbon and Nicole Macri and many, many more have supported and endorsed my campaign to solve the toughest issues in front of us. I ask for your support. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, West Seattle, for bringing us together for our very first in-person and maybe only in-person forum. Again, I'm Jessyn Farrell, running for mayor of Seattle, and I would be so delighted to earn your support. This is a moment where so many of us are angry and frustrated by our city's seeming inability to move forward on our biggest issues, whether it's homelessness, climate change, gun violence, basic infrastructure like bridges and transit. And this is a moment where we need a leader who's able to put words into action, build bridges, literally and figuratively, as well as put in the solution scaled to the size of the problem. We have to stop patting ourselves on the back for incrementalism in the city. And we need a leader who will sweat the details and make the issues of this community her priority. I look forward to working with you to create a Seattle that is truly just and equitable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us today. I'm just delighted to be with this wonderful group of people. I'm always impressed by your eloquence and your brilliance. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Colleen Echohawk. I'm a enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. I am running because we have community members who are suffering. In March of 2020, I remember very distinctly looking into the eyes of a grandma and a 4-year-old who said that they were sleeping in a tent because they were afraid of contracting COVID in a community shelter. We have thousands and thousands of people sleeping on our streets in a city like Seattle. It's why I'm running. I happen to have some other great skills as well beyond my work in homelessness. I've been a community police commissioner for 4 years. I'm the founder of the Equitable Recovery and Reconciliation Alliance. I'm a dedicated public servant. I would be honored to earn your vote. Thank you so much.
James Donaldson for mayor. Thank you very much for your time today. I'm running as a concerned Seattle citizen. I've been here in Seattle for 40 years. I was here during the height of its glory and wonderful times. I've been here through the last 8 years of total ineptness with our 3 branches of government, mayor, city council, and our attorney general, or prosecuting attorney, excuse me. My cabinet would be very diverse. I mean, we have several people up here who can represent my cabinet very well. Colleen with our indigenous people. Jessyn has a young mom with young children. Andrew, a young person barely out of his teens, doing his thing. This is what Seattle's all about. We need that diversity, and I will be a great leader for this city. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for taking the time out. Also, thank you to everybody who came by. And just a few words that the voting starts in just a matter of days. King County election sends out the ballots next week, and August 3rd is the deadline to get your ballot in. Thank you again.
As a reminder, the candidates will be posing for a picture, and so if you need to talk to them, give us about 2-3 minutes. So everybody can come to the front of the table. Mr. Donaldson, you probably know, tall people in the back. I'm sure you guys can